Thank you, Marina. Should I start now?
Yeah, I think we should go ahead
Perfect.
and dive right in.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marina, for the opportunity to speak all of you. I know it's kind of the awkward, almost like a comedian speaking to the camera without the audience. I'm doing this Netflix special show that without the audience, but I will try my best to share our story and maybe in the meantime provide a little bit entertaining purpose for you. So maybe I'll start with the little bit introduction of ourselves. LoganHR, we are a consulting firm that's focusing on I call that unfortunate nickname CPR. Many of you probably it's easier to explain to people what you actually do for a living. Believe it or not, I've been doing this for 20 years. My parents still doesn't know what I do for a living. My mom think I'm payroll, and my dad actually think that I usually go to company and deal with those problematic employee, and this is his definition of performance management. And joke aside, really, the whole idea of having a boutique consulting firm focusing on the C, P, and R is try to help organizations connect companies and organizations' career programs and their performance programs and rewards programs. Because a lot of times that organization either don't have any of those programs, or maybe they have the programs, but they don't really connect very well. So, for example, one of the example I always share with the audience is when someone complained about so-and-so is overpaid or underpaid, most of the time that the reason is not because the dollars or how much we pay that person. It's because that person is not performed properly or perform up to expectation. Why that person is not performing? Well, because the person probably is in the wrong career path or the wrong job, and that need to be addressed. So many of the times that career programs and your rewards and your performance process really need to have that connection. And that's what we are focusing on. And many of our clients are from different sectors, financial sectors, technology sectors, industrial, and non-for-profit sectors. Although they're all from different sectors, but human nature is the same. We found that there's a lot of common theme when it comes to the challenge between connecting your performance program with your pay and career program. And today, we're going to be focusing on a few things. First is I want to share with you some key consideration of your performance management program. And it's actually quite funny that when we talk to a lot of our audience and the clients, they're constantly in the sort of redesign of the performance program phase. It is because it's actually very hard to get it right. So we're going to share a few tangible tips about how you consider when you go through the design or redesign process of your performance process. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the ratings. Yes, should we have a rating or not have a rating? Last but not least, many of you probably heard of those non-rating system, and maybe that's why you dial in today to really try to hear about how does it work? Does it actually work? So we're going to share one of the recent implementation that we did with the client that we actually take their traditional performance process to a non-rating system. And what is the lesson learned from that experience? So let's start with the 3 key considerations for performance management design or redesign. There's many different methodology or process, but I think we kind of conclude that there's just 3 things that you really need to thinking through when you go through this journey. First one is to determine the purpose of your performance management. And then we're going to have more slides to talk about it. It really is try to figure out the balance between the performance and the need to align those performance, the need to develop people, and the need to connect to reward program. The second one is to discuss the current trends and to see if those trends and approaches are good for you and why those shift is happening. And the last but not least is some of the key successful factors for the new design for the performance management. So in this slide, you will see that there's the 3 circles. You probably guessed that my favorite number is 3. You're going to see this theme throughout. The 3 things that we think for the purpose of performance management. The first one is really to align the organization goals and objectives down to the individual level. And that's why you see most of the performance management program in their form or their online program, you will see the goal setting part, or sometimes we call that goal cascading or key focus. Those area is really try to connect the individual performers to what their team is supposed to do to what the organization is trying to achieve. So that's actually for a lot of organizations, that is one of the very important reason for them to have a performance process. The second reason is to develop people. That's why you see a lot of plan has the development plan section, career section. Some of them will be called competencies. Some of them will call behavior. Some of them will be coaching session. The idea is to help the employee to do better for their current job and also do better for their future job in their career with the company. And the third element of the purpose is the alignment with rewards program. This is where the performance rating is helpful, because many times when we use the word saying performance management system need to be objective, we need to have a clear connection with the pay program. And that's when you need ratings, because rating is a good way to be able to say, well, we have a number, we have a labeling, we have a words to describe the different buckets or different type of employees, how they perform. And really, the reason we need to know that is when we actually use that information to determine people's salary increase, or for the organization has a bonus program, or for the organization use that information for promotion. And that way you have something, quote, objective that you can actually use to connect to the pay program or rewards program. So these 3 things are actually the most common purposes for a performance process. Now the issue is this 3 process is not, sometimes it's not necessarily pulling the design to the same direction. Imagine if you really want to have an honest conversation about employees' development, then right after you talk about things they achieve and not achieve, it's really awkward to switch that conversation to say, well, things you didn't achieve on those goals, and then let's talk about how you develop that. And the employee, if the employee knows that those sharing the true weakness or improvement area that will impact their performance rating and their pay, they may not actually fully comfortable sharing everything or discuss that with their managers, right? So I think the lesson learned is with the stakeholders, figure out what is your focus of your performance design, because the different organization may have a different kind of focus. And this is the exercise we usually do a lot, and then you can do that with your stakeholders in your organization. Is just to use a sticky note and ask your stakeholder to put their ranking of this 3 purpose, and to see which one is the top ranking purpose of your internal performance process. And some organization may be in this particular example on the left, they're probably saying that driving the organization performance alignment, align those performance goals and objectives are important, but developing people are the most important reason we're doing this. And aligning to the compensation and rewards, yes, but not the biggest one. But imagine in some other organization, maybe the goal alignment is the most important things. And then make sure that we have a clear connection between performance result and pay. is very, very high on their priority list, right? So I think it's important for you to be able to understand who you are as an organization and what kind of performance process is the focus. Because again, most of the stakeholder has their own different priority in their head. And by doing this exercise, it's easier for them to see how everyone is different to each other, and also conclude that what is your organization's priority for those performance design. And because once you actually know how big those circles should be for each of the element, it's easier for you to design a performance profile that would be able to, easier to design a performance program that will be easier to reflect your company culture and the needs for your management team. And next couple of slides, we're going to talk about a few trends and best practice that actually work, because we heard a lot of buzzword and different trends on the article or newspapers, but does it actually work? So we put a summary together to share with you that some of the trends that we actually see how that transform different organizations. I think in the old days, the managing really is about commanding and control. And nowadays, it's much more about connecting and inspire. So you see a lot of organizations use the word coaching or leader instead of the traditional word supervising or managing. And most of the new school performance process is really focusing on not just about the past contribution, but also focusing on the future capacity. So it's more about development, it's about the future goals, it's more forward-looking instead of backward-looking. And a lot of the competency program in those traditional performance process, for example, they want to know how good you are in communication, time management, strategic thinking, problem solving. In the traditional way, it's a long list of the competencies that you want to do. And nowadays, I think most of the organizations realize that adult humans can only change one or two behavior at a time. So there's no point doing like 30 competencies evaluation while you really just want them to focus on one or two critical behavior that want to change, and then set realistic goal about it. And a lot of trend also folks shifting from just individual contribution to how we do things together. So there's actually definitely, you can see that the team or the group focus is actually on the rise. And then last but not least is the numerical rating or labeling has been replaced by words. So traditionally you would see a lot of 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 kind of ratings. But nowadays it's more common to hear people saying that meet or do not meet or exceed, or some people use the word outstanding or excellent, all the best, different kind of wording that to describe it, and I think provide a little bit more meaning for employee about those ratings.
Hi, Vincent. I'm just going to jump in for a sec. We're experiencing a little bit of static. I'm not sure if it's a bit of background noise on your end or if it could be a headset issue, but just for folks, we are aware of it, and we're going to continue on with the session. Vincent, I'll jump in if it continues, and we may have to get you to phone in if it is ongoing.
Okay. Is it better now, or?
I think that sounds better. So we'll just keep monitoring, and I will let you know if it continues.
Okay, perfect. Thank
you so much.
The next slide, there's more of the sort of trends and best practices. For a lot of organizations, traditionally they have this formal review. Maybe it's once a year or twice a year. I think definitely the trend that actually is working is a frequent touch points and check-ins. And that actually has been adopted, whether you actually switch to the no rating performance process or stick with your current process. We found that a lot of organizations will be very, very great that if they start to increase the touch point in terms of the frequencies, but that doesn't have to be long, but we want to make sure that there's much more frequent check-in between the manager and employees. That usually works really well. And then the next trend also works really well is having employee have more ownership about this process. Instead of calling this a performance appraisal, it's a top-down approach. A lot of organizations now, it's really saying it's a bottom-up approach. You hear the language like employee own their own career and their performance, so that it's employee actually own it. And some organizations describe it as a shared accountability between companies and the employees. So the trend definitely is giving that from the top-down approach to bottom-up or two direction to sort of find a middle ground approach for the performance process. And also, a lot of organizations start to thinking about multiple recognition opportunities. And that's, you notice that for the past couple of years, the recognition program is actually a very important thing now. So it's not just about salary or bonus or opportunity to be promoted, but also there's a peer-to-peer recognition. There's a more frequent organization-wide recognition program happening. And many of you probably have watched Daniel Pink's TED Talk, and that's probably one of the most popular HR TED Talk ever. It's really tried to describe the phenomena that people realize that the traditional view of using money to drive performance is not necessarily all true. Many people now believe that the self-determination is actually the real reason that people do a good job. So I think that fundamentally changed a lot of people's view about performance process, particularly those ones that support the no rating system. So that's actually a very important movement. Last but not least is really changing even the word to describe the process from sort of performance appraisal to performance management. Now you definitely hear the word development, alignment, or feedback. So it's actually even, we have a client change their performance process called coaching for success. You don't even hear the word performance in the name of that process. It's just basically coaching for success process. So a lot of organizations using those more positive words to replace the traditional wording. And in this slide, we put some of the wording together to show you the pros and cons of ratings or no ratings. We also post an article at the CharityVillage website, so you can actually see more detail there about the big debate about whether we should have rating or not. So I won't go through the detail of it, but really is a good debate that's happening, which actually for people like me is the most exciting thing ever happened, because 20 years ago, there's no way people are gonna have this conversation saying, let's take out the rating from the performance process. People are gonna ask like, so why bother having a performance process if there's no rating? Nowadays, people start to use a lot of scientific research and actual experience to show that actually you don't need to have a rating to make your performance process work. So there's a lot of definitely reason for organization to say, actually from a neural leadership perspective, from a culture perspective, that we really don't need a rating anymore. And for a lot of organizations, they still think about, well, for a very good reason that we still need ratings because of culture reason, or we need the rating to be able to connect with rewards program clearly and objectively. Right? So I don't think the answer is so clear. And also, I don't really think that there is a clear decision to say which one is better. Whenever I've been asked with this question, I always want to make sure that the organization understand who they are as an organization and understanding that what kind of approach will work best for them. And for those organizations that decide to keep the traditional ratings, the next question usually is about, well, if we're going to have ratings, how many ratings do we need? I usually use the next slide to share with the stakeholders to say, well, think about if your employees are running a marathon, there's thousands of them running together. Is it really important to differentiate in the middle of the biggest crowd when they cross the finish line, someone run through the finish line 20 minutes faster than the other? Or is it okay just to be happy that they all finished the marathon, and then we should happy and celebrate the fact that they achieved the goal that they set out to do? So I think most of the business owners and executive and managers I talk to will agree that really we don't really need to know exactly who are the number 5,260 or the 6,540 across the finish line. That's not the important factor to differentiate to that level. We want to make sure that majority of the people complete their journey, doing a good job, being successful. But we do want to know that maybe some of the people trained extra hard and then they have extraordinary result. And that is to say that, well, maybe there's some people really is running faster than the rest of the group. Then we want to recognize them, maybe a medal, or maybe some prize to recognize that they are deliver different kind of result than the rest of the people. And then there will be some people struggling with the race. So, they maybe follow behind or they couldn't finish the race. So right there, we have 3 different groups already. And some organizations maybe prefer 4 or 5. And study shows that whether you use 3 points or 4 points, 5 points, or even 6, the success of your rating system really is not about how many points you have. It's how do you define them clearly so that people knows what is the difference between each of the group. And I think if you think about how many groups you really need to cut while employee running through marathon, it's actually easier for you to think about how many groups do you really need in your performance rating system. And when we have this rating debate, there's another 3 key factors that will come into play. One is management capability. A lot of times that the discussion of whether we're going to have rating or not, it's really about, does our managers have the skills to deliver those performance feedback without the ratings? Because often those ratings become a support system or crutch for conversation. Many managers, instead of telling employees what they truly think they should improve, they basically avoid that honest conversation by telling them you are a 3. And instead of telling them what is the actual behavior they need to change. And so once you take out that ratings, some of the manager may not know how to have that conversation with employees. And then the other consideration is legally, do you need to have something to be able to show that the improvement conversation is happening, or sometimes the HR's worst nightmare is someone get laid off because performance issue, but there's no document or any record of that happening. So many HR people worry about, if we don't have performance ratings, how do we know that someone is not performing? And then the answer really, if I provide that sort of insight, is whether you have rating or not, you still need to document those conversations if someone have performance issue, right? So many of those performance process that without ratings still have a performance improvement plan, which is a separate process to deal with employee really struggle. Think about those people who couldn't finish the marathon. It's really the action is not just try to lay them off, but also is to have a program to help them so that they can actually complete the race next year. So I think the idea of legal consideration is important, but we want to make sure that organizations have an effective way to deal with the non-performing employees. And that's actually, whether you have rating or not, is still very important. And the last but not least is, how does that gonna impact your rewards, pay program, and opportunity for career if you don't have rating system? Because if you don't have a rating system, for many organizations, they worry about then we're gonna be, play favoritism or become a sort of discretionary decisions. And does it gonna be seen as not a objective or not transparent? So how do we actually link our performance result to rewards and career opportunity become a big factor during this debate. And this slide really is trying to illustrate a little bit more about the last point I was trying to make, because a lot of times that when we talk to a new client, there's many times that you hear the executive director or CEO or owner says, I want to have those new school performance system focusing on conversation and feedback. We don't want the old school performance process. That's great, but they don't want to change their incentive plan or bonus plan or salary increase program. They still want to be, quote, objective, has a scorecard or some sort of measurement so that they can actually do compensation objectively. And that's actually become a problem, because when you have a performance process is about conversation and frequent checking, then if you have a compensation program, it's basically based on actual scores or ratings, and eventually those compensation programs become your new performance program, right? Because the alignment between the performance program and incentive pay or salary increase is so important that you actually have to think about, if you're going to have a new school performance program, then you can have a new school incentive program. If you want a traditional incentive program, then you make sure that your performance process still be able to produce those rating and calculations so that your program will be seen as objective and effective. I'm going to use the rest of the time for this webinar to share with you an actual implementation experience with the credit union, because I think that really share with you some insight about how we go about doing this. This is a small credit union that has about 27,000 members, 10 branches, and 220 employees. And the challenge has been the process is dated, nobody likes it, inconsistent, and it's very similar to most of the organization. And they do have the inspiration to be top employer for their province. So the question is, how do we actually change our performance process? And they also recently implement a Heart of Coaching, basically is a coaching exercise for their management. It's sort of a management development program. So they want to make sure that while managers start to have better coaching abilities, the process will be able to let them utilize that new skills and then do a better job in performance management. When we started, we actually is not set our sort of mind into a no rating system. The credit union is very open-minded to say we're open to any kind of results or solution to it. And so that's actually interesting journey with the organization to figure out what is the best solution for them. So we start with the exercise, understanding about what is the focus of their performance program, what is the true purpose of their program. And with the exercise with their key executive team members, we actually realize that what is the most important thing for them really is the aligning that goals and objective from organization down to team, down to individual. And they do want to focusing on developing their people too. And the alignment with rewards and recognition actually is less a issue for them. A lot of comments you will hear from the management executive is very team or group oriented. Someone even say that they don't like those superstars because that create problem for everyone. Like language like that, that the organization really care about the group and collaboration instead of the individual performance. And we start talking about the definition of the performance. And one sort of aha moment is it's not like the organization doesn't like to focusing on those top performer or high performer. We should really shift our focus from focusing on those top performer or top performing employee to high performing behaviors. It's basically saying not just about those people, certain employees will be able to demonstrate those high-performing behaviors. Everybody be able to do that. And I think that's a mindset shift for the organizations to say, let's not focusing on those people who we call that high-performing employees, but focusing on how do we help everyone to have those high-performance behavior or high-performing moment. And so that's actually, the more we talk about the purpose of the performance process, the more we start to thinking about the traditional rating doesn't really work with the new kind of thinking anymore. And finally conclude that we really don't need the traditional ratings, because what we really need is a process that helps us align those goals and objectives and spend good time to talk about development programs for employees. So the final result actually is quite simple. It's only 2-page form, and then from the manager employee need to go through those questions on the at least every 2 months base. And we actually add several guiding questions for those performance planning and checking. The idea is really, this is not just about ratings anymore. This is really about conversation. So we got feedback from the design team that a lot of manager really doesn't know how to start that conversation. So on that form, we actually have some guiding questions for the manager so that at least they know what is the first question to ask, how do they start that conversation. And then combining their latest training on the coaching skills, they can have a better conversation with employees. Really is focusing on the discussions. We still want them to have a documentation about what they talk about, but we kind of make the space so small that they really can just capture the highlight. It's not really want them to write a 2-page long notes about their conversation. The idea is every 2 months, at least every 2 months, we need to have that kind of a conversation about the employee's goal, alignment, and development. And also a high performance recognition program is created, and to make sure that they elevate their current sort of informal recognition program to the next level. So give them more resources and training for manager to know that when someone is demonstrating those high performance behavior, let's recognize them right away, so that actually we don't need to wait until the end of the year to say that someone is a top performer. It's actually when those behavior happens, let's recognize right away. And in terms of the management capacity, as we talk about that, once you take out the ratings, really the manager really have to speak for themselves. What is the behavior that make the employee stand out or do a good job or need to improve? So I think there's ongoing training for the managers, introduce them to the new performance process and how do they focusing on the recognitions and how do they make how do those programs impact the compensation decisions. So basically the organization run a lot of sessions for the managers to help them understand the new programs and how they incorporate the coaching skills. And also from the HR team, we provide a lot of guides and tools. That way the managers really feel confident that when they go into that conversation with employees, they actually have tools and material to prepare, and then so that the conversation can be effective. And last but not least, on the legal side, so there is a box at the end of the performance form to say that the manager need to initiate a performance improvement plan. Basically, so that's also sometimes people saying there's no such thing as no rating system, because any no rating system still has basically 2 ratings, because you can say one rating is success, the other one is a need improvement. In this case, we separate the performance improvement process as a separate process. So for most of the employees, they won't see that form, they don't need to go through that process. For most of the employees, the performance process just basically capture those frequent conversations and that's it. But if this box is checked, then there's a separate process, just like most organizations has a standard typical performance improvement process for kicking. And that way, there's a proper document about we are formally start to have this conversation with this employee. And if inevitably we have to let this employee go, there's a proper document right there. And as to the impact of their compensation program, they had a traditional incentive plan, basically has a corporate multiplier, team multiplier, and an individual multiplier times their target percentage for each person's job. Because the change, then basically we got to the executive and the board to agree that we're turning their incentive plan back to the traditional group sharing plan. Basically is saying that if two employees are both successful and both contributing, then there won't be any differentiation between their pay. Basically, the only differentiation of their bonus payout really is the financial result with at the year end. So if their credit union member got to have the payout for dividends, and then their employee will receive those payments. And the message for their incentive plan is also changing from the traditional wording of like driving performance or recognize individual performance to sharing success. So the message of the plan kind of switched from focusing on individual to sharing the overall success of the organization. On the base salary, what they did is basically let the different the zone of each range to decide what is the salary increase. That is to say that if you are in certain job range, and if you're in the low end of the range, you will get more salary increase. And then if you're in the high end of the range, you will get less. And manager has some discretionary control over that decision, but they have to change those numbers within their pool. So that basically give manager enough guidance to say how they can actually use a consistent guideline to decide the salary increase. But there's still small room for the manager to do some discretionary changes within their team. And also, because that discretionary, we added a formal secondary review, sort of calibration process to make sure that there's another level of the executive has been reviewed the result. So give the employee a sort of extra peace of mind that it's when manager use those discretionary decision making, it will be reviewed by the next level executives. The outcome actually is, as everybody was very anxious. This is their second year already implementing this. Definitely, they noticed that there's actually significant time savings because actually they'll actually be able to do those small checking throughout the year. So they actually don't need to have those long year-end review. And also the anxiety level definitely decreased. And that's not just about the employee feel like less anxious. It's actually for a lot of managers. They feel like they're actually looking forward to have that conversation instead of sort of nervous about that conversation once a year, because then now they're actually just focusing on the actual performance alignment, the actual behavior, and then not worry about the rating for the majority of the employees. And many managers actually saying that because there's no ratings or year-end review, they actually deal with the non-performing employee much sooner because they're not waiting till the end of the year to give that person a bad rating to send a message. They basically just give that person the direct and honest conversation to say things that you're not doing well and how we can help you to improve that. And also because there's always a fear of without ratings, we may not be doing a good job for those non-performing employees. Actually, the HR noticed that the organization is more proactively dealing with those non-performing employees because we don't want to, to give this process a bad name. So surprisingly, actually, the result is the manager feel like they're more comfortable sharing those good news story with employees, And on the other hand, we also be able to deal with those bad performers much more effectively. And then we got a lot of really good feedback from the branch manager and meet management team. And this is just one of them I want to share with you to give you that true feeling about this is their actual words, how they actually feel about the new performance management system and how they impact their pay. So I think that really for this particular organization, things really worked out really well for them because their culture and their belief in what is the true performance and how they recognize them. So last but not least, let's talk about if you're going to go for this journey and start thinking about, let's take out the rating for your performance process. Or you currently have those performance process that without rating already. So we want to make sure that organization do thinking about the alignment with their organization performance and their people development, because that actually is the most of the common reason that organization switch to the no rating system. But again, sometimes your stakeholder may think that way. So this is something that you do want to check if that actually will work for you. And then consider that what and the how factors, right? Aligning the key behavior value to each of the goals and separate the behavior value goals, because a lot of times that when they actually mix together, sometimes manager doesn't know how to articulate that well. So a lot of the process will actually help the manager to say what they have achieved and how they achieved. And then shifting from those traditional documentation to a more coaching style really work for a lot of the organization and manager nowadays. So the frequent checking to ensure that performance on track and focusing on the future rather than the past really is the most organization try to focus nowadays, that moving away from the appraisal to the future development. And I think if you're actually thinking about those are the things that you actually are focusing on, and there may be an opportunity for you to explore more about the no rating performance process. And last but not least is a checklist to make sure that if you're actually going to go for that direction, make sure that you actually have a program in place to help the transition. Because from the management capability perspective, we definitely cannot assume that manager can just have that conversation without a rating. They need to be trained. They need to have a session for them to practice how that new conversation going to happen. So a lot of resources and training and support really is required. And from a legal perspective, want to make sure that you still have the process to be able to have the documentation, even though the focus of the documentation is very different now, but you still want to make sure that you can deal with the legal considerations. And last but not least, as I mentioned, when you go through this design, make sure that you also focusing on how those performance results will impact the pay decisions or opportunity for the career. Again, it doesn't have to be ratings, but if that's not ratings, then what will be the factors and how that process is going to look like? Hopefully that the case of this credit union implementation provides you some of the insight and a tangible takeaway. And that's it. That's my presentation. And I assume we can open up for people to have some questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vincent. And I want to thank everyone who's been on the call and submitting some really great questions. I also want to thank you all for your patience with the little bit of static that we had going on. Of course, as these things happen, that was not a problem in our 2 practice sessions. So often tech wants to just rear its ugly head as soon as we go live. So appreciate your patience and hanging in there with that. I think we could jump in with this fantastic question we have from Noreen. Basically, looking at if you've had a ratings system in the past, and maybe it's actually had a bit of a negative impact on your staff. It hasn't been well received. How do you heal that rift and move towards a no ratings system? How do we make the staff more comfortable?
Yeah, and I think we're taking the learning from this exercise is when you design a new program, definitely that's an opportunity to refresh people's memory. And definitely from if you think about changing from your traditional rating system to a no rating system, it's a fundamental change, and then definitely give you a lot of opportunity to rebrand the whole process. And definitely the focus of the conversation, the frequency will be different. And also the other thing you can think about is how do you describe this process by even just from the superficial, changing the name of the process is different. The other idea we did in this implementation is we do have the employee focus group to be part of the process. They're not decision makers, but they actually participating in how we implement and how we communicate to employees. So some of the employee has that sort of participation throughout the process. And they later on, they become the number one fan of the new process. And then they basically informally really help the organization have that credibility to say employee will support the new process. So I think definitely from sort of fundamental changes from the name change, and also when you implement this process, you can think about how to engage those employees so that they understand the differences.
That's great. And when it comes to training for managers, I know you mentioned the Heart of Coaching training. Is there any other training or development resources that you recommend for that?
Yeah, and actually for that particular credit union, that's the program I chose, and definitely by no means I'm saying that's the only one. There's so many different training programs for the organization to choose, or many organizations has their internal training program. But I think the most important training, I think for most of the manager is the goal setting and feedback. Based on our experiences, most of the managers, if they can do this two things well with the employees, then it's pretty much 99% of your performance process. Helping people develop their career, those things usually it's an easier conversation. The difficult one is how do you set goals for your employees? And then again, sometimes the organization want employee to set their goals first and then get their manager's input. Sometimes it's the collaboration. But the most difficult part is how do you write it down to say, well, we have a payroll coordinator, so they do payroll. What is the goal for this payroll person? How they're going to connect with our organization's mission and strategic goals, right? So for a lot of managers, it's really hard to do so. And my recommendation is actually you can run a workshop that we've done before, is to get all the management together and actually utilizing the peer coaching as a way to make them help each other to prepare those goal setting for their employees. It's actually quite amazing when those managers get together and talk about the challenges and how they're going to set the goal for their teams. Suddenly the ideas start to happen, and then they start to help each other to complete that process. So they have some idea about how to set goals. The other one I talked about, the training, is about how to give people feedback. And that can be a standalone training because it's not necessarily just about the performance process for coaching. I think a big part of the job for a manager is how to give employee feedback, whether that's positive or negative. A lot of times that it's a kind of awkward conversation. Again, I want to emphasize, sometimes even give people positive feedback, it's an awkward experience for some people. Some manager doesn't know how to do that properly. Either they overdo it or underdo it. In terms of the difficult conversation, provide people negative impact, again, that has to be done carefully, fact-based, and then also provide a support. So those things that most organizations can find a lot of resources online, or a sort of current training programs that are provided by many vendors, or your in-house HR can easily develop some of the program. And my experience is it doesn't have to be very content heavy, because again, most of your managers actually heard of those theories and practice, the theory and the principle of those feedback. What they really need is to get together and you force them to practice among themselves. So I've seen even just some of times the HR can just prepare some scenarios and then give those managers to practice each other and give each other some tips about how they do those feedback sessions. So my point is, if you don't have budget to run a large or truly structured feedback training, you can even just run a small workshop, give them some scenario and practice among themselves.
That's a great tip. Now, it seems like traditional rating systems tend to sort of focus on past behaviors, and we've noticed that you're talking a lot here about sort of not focusing on past behaviors necessarily with this system. If in a traditional system the past behavior observation was used to help an employee with development or goal setting for the future, how would this be handled with this process?
So you're saying is, inevitably, we still need to touch base on the past performance in order to talk about the future, right? So I think a lot of times that you don't need to talk about what happened, but I think we just want to train the manager, have that mindset in their mind to say is the reason we talk about what happened is really not try to stay there. It really is try to so that we can go forward. And I think a lot of time that manager's job is not just try to describe what went wrong, but also is try to describe like what do I want to see. So I think that gives manager a sort of a challenge for many of them, because it's easier for human to point out something is not going well, or someone is not doing something. But I think we just want to make sure that manager has a better preparation to say, well, if someone is not doing their job or someone is not working out, what is the things that we want that person to do? And then again, that's actually one of the reasons why we're switching from managing to coaching, for example. It really is the manager need to have a new way of thinking about this topic to say is, if I were your coach, how can I describe or support you to get to we want you to be?
Awesome. And this is a question that's come up a lot. You can probably expect this from our nonprofit audience, Vincent. Obviously, most nonprofits don't have capacity to be looking at monetary bonuses or incentives or possibly even salary increases. What do you recommend if there's a shift to this new school performance management to help make rewards and recognition sincere and fulfilling without that monetary aspect?
And I would actually argue that it's actually because you don't have a lot of ability to use money to reward people, then actually force you to be truly genuine about when you give someone a recognition. Again, it doesn't have to be money. A lot of times that the people don't want to generalize it, but my experience has been a lot of employees work in this sector because they truly has a belief that what they're doing really can make a difference. So a lot of the employees in this sector truly believing the mission of the organization, and then understanding that what they are doing every day can make a difference in the community. So I think in a way that non-for-profit sector has the best opportunity to practice the no rating system, because you don't have a lot of, most of the organization doesn't have a lot of money to do salary increase or bonus or anything like that. So really it's by switching or focusing on the no rating system, you're focusing on the conversation and recognition and development instead of thinking about how they're gonna link to the pay. Now, a lot of people may criticize to say, well, then how do you differentiate people's performance? How do you drive performance without money? I think again, in this particular sector, actually the answer is much easier because a lot of employees may not necessarily be driven by money. That's why they really want to work on certain cause or certain focus of the non-for-profit sector. So I think the focus for the manager really is helping them. How do they actually be able to deliver? Back to what we talked about, feedback and coaching. Is part of that is actually how to recognize people. I think there's many ways to actually telling someone they're doing a good job. I think part of the training you probably have heard is, if you just tell people saying you're doing a good job, that's not necessarily a best way to recognize people. But if you're actually telling someone they did a good job and what is the impact of their good job, and that really start to show that your feedback or your recognition start to have much more impact on that employees. So I would definitely encourage the organization spend more time thinking about how do we recognize people, and then not necessarily again using money to do so.
Wonderful. And our last question for the day, Vincent, we've had this come up from quite a few folks. Is there anywhere you can recommend to check out the form you were talking about, the 2-page form for discussion, guiding that discussion that managers are having? Are there resources available online to get more information about that?
That's a great question. Actually, why don't we try this? Because that particular form is designed for that client. But what we can do is we can actually take some of the questions out of that form, and then how about work with Marina and then try to post on your website so that people can have a ability to see how we help those managers using those guiding questions.
That sounds fantastic. I'm sure our audience would very much appreciate that. So folks, we will work on that and do our best to get that information out to you. I'm going to close things there because we're on the top of the hour. Thank you again, Vincent. You gave us lots to think about in this session, lots of great tips.
Thank you.
I just want to remind everyone we are going to follow up with you by email. You should get that this afternoon, maybe tomorrow morning with the webinar recording and the slide deck. There is a short survey there. It takes less than 5 minutes to fill out, and we hope that you'll complete that for us if you can. You have an opportunity there to let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. And we'll share that feedback with Vincent as well. So if you have anything that you want to make sure that Vincent hears about the presentation, please be sure to fill out that survey. We'll be wrapping up this month's leadership series next week on May 23rd with a free webinar on 5 tips to improve culture at your organization. And we hope that we'll see you there. There will be a link to register in the email that you receive later today or tomorrow morning. Thank you again very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next week. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.